Around 8000 BC, which is about 10,000 years ago, humans began to practice agriculture to sustain themselves, replacing hunting and gathering. This agricultural revolution created an important new need for humans, the need for leaders and a proper community structure, which was the first form of the state, to manage and distribute water resources equally for agricultural use, as well as to maintain order and protect the safety of farmers. This is why the first states and human civilizations were born in agricultural regions along four major rivers: Egypt along the Nile River, Mesopotamia along the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, India along the Indus River, and China along the Yellow River. Agriculture was the most important revolution that led to the creation of the state. Because agriculture, including farming and raising animals, was an activity that could produce a large surplus beyond daily needs, the state had another important duty: to manage and store agricultural products in reserve for years when the harvest was not as plentiful. To manage such large stocks of products over a long period, they needed a clear system of record-keeping, and in order to keep records, they needed to create writing. The creation of writing is considered the dividing line between the prehistoric era and the historical era. However, the boundary of prehistory is not the same everywhere in the world, because people in different places did not begin to create writing at the same time. In places where writing had not yet been created, people continued to live in the prehistoric era. Meanwhile, in other places where writing had been created, people began to step into the historical era. In Egypt, people began to create writing around 3000 to 4000 BC, approximately 5000 to 6000 years before the present day. The very first form of the state in human history was born in this country of Egypt. The state first emerged in Egypt along the Nile River out of the necessities of the climate. Egypt, located near the Sahara Desert, is a region with very little rainfall. The farmers who lived there needed leaders and a state structure to help manage and distribute water resources for use, ensuring fairness and avoiding conflict. Egypt at that time was a kingdom with a large population, about 7 to 8 million people. The Egyptian kingdom enjoyed prosperity and independence for approximately 25 centuries. It was during this prosperous ancient Egyptian kingdom that many pyramids were built, leaving behind wonders of the human race that exist to this day. The independent Egyptian kingdom came to an end in 525 BC, when Egypt was invaded and occupied by the Persian Empire. From that time on, Egypt fell into decline and lost its independence until the 1950s, only recently, when a modern and independent Egypt was born again. After Egypt, state structures also began to take shape in Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq. Along the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, many kingdoms emerged one after another. Among them, one most widely known was Babylon. The Babylonian kingdom had its capital near the modern-day capital of Baghdad, Iraq. The ancient Babylonian kingdom had a king, Hammurabi, who was famous for taking legal principles and compiling them into a complete legal code, commonly known as the Code of Hammurabi. It was created around 1750 BC and is the first complete legal code in human history. The kingdoms in the Mesopotamian region also had architecture that was just as prosperous as Egypt's. However, in Mesopotamia, most structures were built from clay brick, which could not last as long as the stone structures in Egypt. In ancient times, Egypt and Mesopotamia, which shared a border in Palestine, were the fiercest of rivals. Leaving Mesopotamia, if one travels east and moves forward in time by about 1500 years, one would see two more civilizations: India along the Indus River and China along the Yellow River. The question is, why did states emerge in India and China 1500 years later? In fact, in this region, although climate change caused deforestation and created many deserts, unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, The area around the Indus and Yellow rivers was a region with abundant rainfall. Therefore, the evolution towards the formation of a state in India and China happened gradually, because the people in this region did not have as urgent and pressing a need to create a state structure to manage and distribute water resources for use as they did in Egypt and Mesopotamia. "1,000 years BC, about 3,000 years before our present day, 4 civilizations had been born on planet Earth: Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and China. Each had a total population of about 10 million people and had significant contact with each other through both war and trade. Silk, which at that time was only produced in China, was brought and sold all the way to Egypt. It traveled along a long land route known as the Silk Road, starting from Chang'an in China, passing through India, Mesopotamia, and reaching Egypt. As for warfare, ancient China and India did not fight each other directly as much as Egypt and Mesopotamia did. However, within the Chinese Empire itself, states and cities fought bloody wars against each other without mercy, to the point that it was known as the era of warring states. It wasn't until the year 220 BC that the Chinese Empire knew unification for the first time under the leadership of Emperor Qin. In the history of ancient China, there were periods of unity and prosperity, such as the Han Dynasty from 200 BC to 200 AD, the Tang Dynasty during the 7th to 10th centuries AD, the Song Dynasty from the late 10th to the 13th century, and the Ming Dynasty between the 14th and 17th centuries. These are considered the most prosperous eras in Chinese history as well as in the history of humanity. Between all these prosperous eras were dark ages when the Chinese people experienced division, conflict, and anarchy, such as the Three Kingdoms period, which was one of the bloodiest eras in Chinese history and is often written about in stories, plays, or made into films, such as Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Besides rebellions, coups, and internal wars, the ancient Chinese Empire also faced another major threat: invasion from tribal groups who still lived in a prehistoric way. It was to protect themselves from invasions by these groups that China built the Great Wall, a great wall that continues to stand to this day. Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, China. These are the very first civilizations of humanity. They're the places where agriculture was born thousands of years ago, a way of life that we continue to see to this day. Creative ideas and certain recreational items like the compass, gunpowder, and legal codes are all legacies left behind by these 4 ancient civilizations for humanity to continue using up to the present day. When we read, listen to, and watch the news every day, we still see China, India, Egypt, and the Middle East continuing to be major topics of interest for humanity in the modern era.